So today we're going to discuss some of the fattier flavors of financial independence, specifically FatFIRE and MoFIRE. Can you handle the richness? Welcome back to Generation FIRE, where we bring the goal of financial independence to all generations. So last time we discussed the history of the FIRE movement, which of course stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. We went into some of the figures who founded the movement, like Mr. Money Mustache and Vicki Robin, and then we talked about the Trinity study and the 4% rule. So today, I want to go over two types of financial independence. The first one is FatFIRE and the second one is MoFIRE. That's my favorite. FatFIRE implies spending over $100,000 in retirement, while MoFIRE stands for Morbidly Obese FIRE and implies spending over $200,000 in retirement. So I think it's important to talk about these flavors of financial independence because a lot of people have the wrong idea about financial independence. I think that many people think that just because someone is seeking FIRE, they're a penny-pinching miser and also lazy because they're seeking early retirement. We discussed at the end of the last episode how early retirement is completely optional. In fact, all of the people that I personally know who have achieved financial independence have continued to work. The main difference is that they're in complete control of their day-to-day schedule and they get to do exactly the kind of work that brings them joy. In an ideal scenario, work is something that brings both satisfaction and intellectual stimulation. So I can understand why people continue to work after financial independence. It's part of the reason why I still work, despite being in a very fortunate position where I have a mix of income options beyond my surgical income alone. So the true goal that drives me now is to move as many people as possible towards financial freedom, primarily through the power of real estate investment. Did I mention that this episode is sponsored by Cereus Real Estate? We've officially launched in January, and we're actively signing up potential investors for real estate investments. We're a real estate company founded by physicians, and our goal is to offer high-quality real estate investment opportunities to help move you closer to financial freedom. Come and check us out at SeriusRealEstate.com. Now back to the show. Let's talk about FatFIRE. So as I mentioned above, FatFIRE implies spending at least $100,000 annually in retirement. This is over $8,000 a month, which for most people is sufficient to live a good quality of life in most cities in our country. This amount of money will go even further in retirement when you consider that most people in retirement aim to have most of their debts paid off. So imagine your living costs if you didn't have student loans, a mortgage, and a car payment. $8,000 would go a long way, right? People who are aiming for FatFIRE don't want to be so limited in their spending in retirement. They want to be able to go out to restaurants and have the ability to travel modestly and see friends and family when they would like to do so. If you're interested in a FatFIRE level of retirement, by the 4% rule, you need to have at least $2.5 million saved in a mix of stocks and bonds at the time of your retirement. Again, the 4% rule is from the Trinity study, which showed that with a mix of stocks and bonds, you can safely withdraw up to 4% of your nest egg without the risk of depleting your funds over a 30-year time period. $2.5 million is a lot of money, so let's take a moment to discuss what you'd have to do to save that much money by retirement. Spoiler alert, it's not as hard as you might think. So to save $2.5 million, you do need to consistently save money and invest it into the stock market. But surprisingly, beyond the money, the more important elements are time and the magic of compound interest. Because if we assume an 8% average annual return in the stock market, which is historically accurate, you only need to put away a fraction of that $2.5 million, as long as you have time on your hands. I'll put a chart in here which shows exactly what I mean, and I generated this chart using a compound interest calculator. In this example, let's say you're 65 years old right now and you're ready to start retirement at the FatFIRE level of $100,000 a year. Let's rewind the clock and say that you started earning a decent salary at the age of 25 years old. So this calculation shows that to have the required amount of stocks and bonds by the time you turn 65 years old, you just have to save $850 every month for 40 years. Over that time period, you actually only put away a total of $408,000. However, due to the magic of compound interest, that $408,000 will grow to over $2.6 million over that time period. This is probably a good time to address an important factor in any talk about financial independence, and that's inflation. Over the last year, everyone has seen the pretty drastic effect that inflation can have on your day-to-day cost of living. Inflation does seem to be coming under control now, but you can see easily that if you don't factor in this economic force, your retirement calculations might be totally worthless. So anytime that I look forward to the future, I assume a 4% inflation rate in the cost of living. So this might apply to things like groceries, gas, and things like entertainment. I think you could effectively argue that some categories like healthcare and college tuition should probably have even a higher expected rate of inflation. You're probably right about that, but let's leave that nuance for another day. Now, let's talk about my favorite flavor of financial independence, MoFIRE. So MoFIRE stands for Morbidly Obese Fire, and it implies spending north of $200,000 a year in retirement. That's around $16,700 a month. So if you thought $100,000 a year was a lot of money, now double that amount. With $200,000 a year, people who've achieved MoFIRE can have significantly more options in terms of living, eating, and travel. Instead of just traveling in the continental United States, for example, you can easily travel to Europe a couple times a year with that kind of money. And instead of limiting your restaurant choices, you can also throw in a few Michelin-star restaurants to really expand your palate. And if you're going to be renting a place in retirement, you'll have a much wider range of options with a MoFIRE level of spending. So for me, I aspire to at least a MoFIRE level of spending in retirement. Because of the phenomenon of hedonic adaptation, it's very difficult to move backwards in terms of quality of life. And for better or for worse, my family has gotten used to a certain level of lifestyle that feels right for us. So for my financial independence target, I'm setting the bar to achieve at least a MoFIRE level of spending. And I do think that the right way to think about FatFIRE and MoFIRE is in the context of the word security. Just because you've achieved FatFIRE doesn't mean that the retirement police are going to make sure that you spend at least $100,000 a year. The important thing is that you can spend up to that amount if you'd like to do so. So for some people who are generally suspicious of the 4% rule and the concept of financial freedom, setting a conservative goal like FatFIRE might be the right move. Again, you don't need to spend $100,000 in retirement just because you've achieved FatFIRE, but if you want to, you can safely do so. So if you thought the financial freedom movement was all about saltine crackers and sardines, now you know that there's a wide variety of levels out there for you to consider. Today we discussed FatFIRE and MoFIRE, which entail the ability to spend at least $100,000 and $200,000 a year in retirement. I personally know a lot of physicians who are working towards at least a FatFIRE level of financial freedom. I'm personally working towards MoFIRE, which is also known as morbidly obese financial independence. So that's enough for today, but next episode we're going to talk about some of the leaner flavors of FIRE, such as Lean FIRE, Barista FIRE, and Coast FIRE. I'm Dan the Darwinian Doctor. I'm a surgeon and real estate investor, and I want to help move as many people as possible towards financial freedom. It would really help out the channel if you can make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over the course of the year, I'm going to be serving up a ton of content that will help get you on the path to financial freedom. So see you next time.